The following program is a production of WSWP TV, Grandview, West Virginia.
Hello, I'm Margaret Meador, and today we'll be canning and freezing meat here on Food Preserving. While freezing meat is perhaps the easiest and the most popular way of preserving meat today, let's not forget that meat can also be canned, and many times there's a good reason that you will want to. For instance, you may not have enough storage space for a whole beef or for a large yield of wild meat such as venison. You remember that you should not freeze more than 1/3 of your freezer space at one time for best results. So you may want to can it. And canning, of course, requires just limitless space, whatever shelves you have, wherever you have to put it. You may also want to can a tough cut of meat, because canning does tenderize it while freezing doesn't. Then there's the convenience of opening a can of meat and not having to wait while it thaws. And, of course, you may just simply prefer the taste, because canned meat does taste differently from frozen meat, and some people prefer it. One thing we should remember in handling meat in any way, and especially canning, is that we must be absolutely sanitary. The meat should be kept refrigerated right up to the time that we are processing it, and all of the utensils, the knives, the kitchen shears, and especially the cutting board, should be washed in hot soapy water before and after every use. And any wooden utensils like the cutting board should be soaked in a solution of diluted household bleach or other disinfectant for at least 15 minutes. This might seem like unnecessary precaution, but remember that much fresh meat, and especially chicken, does have some salmonella bacteria present that we would not want to spread and contaminate to other meat that would be cut up later. Now, another thing to remember in canning meat is that we must use a pressure canner. This is because meat is one of those especially low-acid foods that requires the heat of a pressure canner to destroy all the bacteria. Now, if you don't use a pressure canner, or if you try to follow any shortcuts in the timing, you might end up with a botulism in the jar. I'm sure you would not want this to happen. Now, all meat can be canned. Any kind of meat you'd put into your freezer. Beef, pork, chicken, veal, venison, lamb, just any meat, any form of poultry. But today we're going to can chicken. And I have one here that we'll can in just a moment, but I think I'll put this cut of beef in the refrigerator now, because it should be kept cold until I'm ready to wrap it and use it. Chicken is especially nice for canning, because oftentimes we have a chicken that is too tough for frying, and the canning will help to tenderize it. Before you start to can the chicken, however, remember to get your jars and lids ready. I've already washed my jars and rinsed them in hot water. It's not necessary to sterilize them, remember. And I'm going to pour some boiling water on the lids according to the manufacturer's directions. Follow the directions on the lid of the package of the lids you're using for the instructions. All right, we'll want to wash the chicken, just rinse it in cold water. Remember, absolute cleanliness is essential. I'm going to dry it off with a clean cloth or paper towels. Don't have to get it too dry, and then we'll cut it up. Now, there will be some pieces that are so bony it just isn't worthwhile to put them in the cans. And so these are the things like the wings that we'll want to just cut off and throw away, or to make, not throw away, but to put in the broth pot. Right, now we'll cut off the other wing. There's too much good meat on here to go to waste, although it would take up too much room in the jar if we were to try to can it. Now we'll cut down into the thigh till we can break loose the joint here and find out where to make the cut. Cutting up a chicken isn't very much trouble, and it might mean that you could get the chicken for a few cents less if you buy them. Make another cut in the drumstick, and just after you've broken the joint in two, just cut the two pieces apart. Now we'll do the other leg the same way. You will have to have sharp knives, because this is something that does require really sharp knives. Make another cut. We'll break this, cut between the joint. Now we'll get the breast away from the back. Sometimes it helps to use kitchen shears for this. I find them useful for a lot of different things. Be sure to buy a pair that won't rust and that are strong enough to cut off fins of fish and small chicken bones. Right. Now I'm going to take a boning knife. I'm going to skin the breast first. We usually put the breast in the center of the jar away from the sides, and you usually skin it. By the way, in canning meat, any kind, chicken or beef or whatever, always cut away any excess fat, because it will just cause you problems, boiling up and maybe causing this lid not to seal. Make a cut on the side of the breastbone, and then just cutting and pulling, get the breast meat away from the bone. You can get just about all of it off this way if your knife is sharp. Then you go over to the other side, make another cut, get the point of your knife in, and pull it away. I do this a lot when I'm making what I call a chicken fritter, where you pull the breast meat away and bread it just as you would veal, breaded veal cutlets, and then you deep fry them. They're very nice. It isn't hard to do at all. Of course, we don't want to waste this, so we put it over in the soup pot. Now, because these ends of the leg bone, or what we call the knuckle, will probably extend too far if we're going to use a pint jar, we'll just take those off. The way you do that is to take a cleaver and just break the bone, and then just finish cutting the end off with your kitchen shears. Just a wrap or two will do it. Now we will fill our jar. And you'll want to put the bony pieces on the outside of the jar, because these are the ones we leave the skin on, and these are the ones that will protect the rest of the jar from what we call pressure marks from the heat against the side of the jar. Put your fleshy, skinned breast pieces in the center of the jar, and pack rather loosely, because we're going to can this chicken without exhausting the air out of it, and we don't want it too tight. Now, if you're canning meat, beef or any other kind, or chicken that you've boned that does not have the bone in it, it will be a more solid pack, and it will be necessary for you to put the open jars in a large kettle of water and heat them to a certain temperature and this means that the air then has been exhausted, and you will have shrunk the meat, and you will not have bubbling up against the lid. But if you can chicken with the bone in, this step is not necessary. Now, I have some other jars that I've already filled that I have in the refrigerator. To complete the canning. Remember, it is most important that we keep the meat chilled at all times when it's not actually being processed. I have one jar here that I didn't have quite enough meat to fill, so I'm going to pack it now with some of this I have here. You'll notice I'm not putting any liquid in the jars. In a raw pack, you don't need to, because the juices of the chicken will make its own liquid. Now I'm going to add a half teaspoon of salt for each pint of chicken. Right. And I'm going to, I think I'll wash my hands just a moment. Then I'll be ready to wipe the tops off and put the lids on. Be sure to wipe the tops off with a damp cloth very thoroughly to get any grease that might have got on it or any particle of salt that might prevent a good seal. Now the giblets that I have here, I'm going to put aside and use them later. Maybe I'll make a dish using just them, or I could can them separately. But they should be canned separately, not with the chicken. We're ready now to put our lids on. They've been sitting in the boiling water. This softens them and gets them ready to make the seal. We'll put the screw bands on comfortably tight as you can get them manually with just a hand. And remember, this being a two-piece lid, we'll not tighten them again after removing them from the canner. If this were a zinc lid with rubber ring, we would need to tighten them again. All right, I'm going to put them into the canner now. And I have, in the canner, I have 1.5 to 2 inches of water. This is about right. My canner says about 2 quarts of water. And since the jars are cold, having been refrigerated, it's cold water. If it were hot pack, I could have poured boiling water over them and hastened the process a little. All right, arrange them in the canner so that they're not touching any more than you can help. Now we're going to put the lid on the canner. And I'm going to turn the heat on high to exhaust the steam, the air that's with the steam. And once it starts coming out, we'll exhaust it for about 7 to 10 minutes. And this makes sure that we have only steam in the canner and that it will have the proper amount of heat. Now, while we're doing that, we'll talk about some other things. One of the things you may be wondering is, what am I going to do with all those bones, all those wings and necks and backs? One thing you could do is make a large amount of chicken broth and can it. This is very easily done. We put the backs and necks from the jars I've already shown you in a large saucepan and cooked them for 2 or 3 hours until they were tender. Then we strained the broth, and I put a few pieces of the chicken meat back in it to use as a soup base, and seasoned it with salt, and then I've sealed it. You'll notice I've taken off every bit of the grease that I possibly can to avoid any problems with sealing. I have the lid on it, and now I'm going to process that for 45 minutes. It doesn't take quite as long as the more solid pack whole chicken. All right, let's talk a little bit now while the steam comes up on the canner about freezing meats. Freezing meat is a very easy way to process it or to preserve it. And lots of people buy meat for the freezer in large quantities. Now, you do need to have a little bit of know-how about this because you can lose a lot of money in a large investment like a side of beef. One of the things you need to know about is grading. There are 2 ways that meat is graded. One of these is a quality grade, such as choice and prime and good. And the other one is yield grade. Now, yield grade is sort of new and not too many people know about it, but you can really lose some money if you don't understand about yield grade. Recently, I saw an advertisement in my daily newspaper for a side of beef at 89 cents a pound. and it was supposed to be choice grade 4. Well, the choice was very tempting. I knew from looking at it instantly that choice is next to the highest grade. And so this meant that the beef would be very tender. But what did number 4 mean? This was the catch. Number 4 meant the yield grade. And this is next to the lowest yield grade. The yield grades run from 1 to 5, and they stand for the cutability, or how much waste there'll be in the beef. So a yield grade of number 5 would mean that 1/3 of the meat would be lost in cutting, in fat and bone. A yield grade of number 3, which is the average, means that you lose 28%. And a yield grade of number 1 means you only lose 18%. Now this is important because I really couldn't say, if I bought that side of beef, that the beef cost me 89 cents a pound. I would have to add to that the cost of the 1/3 cutting loss that there would be in this particular yield grade. So since many people are not familiar with yield grades, sometimes it's better to just buy a wholesale cut. Now, a wholesale cut is a large cut, such as a whole round or a whole rib, that has had a lot of trimming already done on it, and the price is closer to what it would be if it were in a retail cut. And this is a very good way to add small amounts of meat to your freezer, to buy a whole rib or a whole chuck or a whole round. Another thing you can do is to watch for the retail cuts. Buy the cuts that your family really likes, this particular steaks or the ground beef or the type of roast, when these are on special. Actually, this is thought to be perhaps the most economical way for the average consumer to buy meat for the freezer, is in buying the retail cuts. One thing you will need to remember is if you buy a retail cut, you will need to rewrap it for a long time storage. Don't try to use the wrap that it comes in for more than 2 weeks in the freezer. All right, let's talk a minute about wraps then. Now, the purpose of a freezer wrap is to exclude the air, and this is the thing that is really the menace in freezing, and that is air. Air which robs the food of its moisture. And we call the worst case of this freezer burn. And if you've ever seen freezer burn, you won't forget it, and unfortunately, it is fatal because there's nothing that can be done about it. Freezer burn results when there's a hole in the packaging or the packaging is not moisture vapor proof, and the air comes in over a period of time and takes away the moisture and leaves a tough, dried up hull instead of a nice moist piece of meat or fruit or vegetable. This is a good wrap for wrapping meat. This is your plastic coated freezer wrap. Here's your plastic coat on the inside, and this is rather inexpensive. Another thing we might use is heavy-duty foil. Don't try to use the thin foil, such as we might have in our kitchens, because it just won't work. Also, you won't want to use wax paper or thin plastic wrap, such as we use in the kitchen, because you'll just be wasting your money. The food will not hold. All right, I have some cuts of meat today that I thought we'd wrap just to see how this will work, and I'll get these right now. These are typical cuts that you might want to wrap, either having bought them in side of beef or in retail cuts. The most popular food that is wrapped for the freezer probably is ground beef or hamburger. Ground beef or hamburger should be packaged the way that it will be used. That is, if you're going to make a sauce out of it, such as spaghetti sauce, you'll probably want it in a lump. This would be the handiest way to use it. So I'm going to freeze half of this 2-pound package in a bulk piece. And the other half I'll freeze in patties. There are a couple of basic ways to wrap meat for the freezer, or anything else for that matter. And one of these is what we call the butcher wrap, where you tuck the end under, and then the opposite ends to the middle, and then we just wrap and tuck, wrap and tuck. Then we take our freezer tape The hardest part's getting it started. And we tape the ends. Remember, our main objective is to try to keep all the air out of it. All right. Now we'll date it and label it. There are special pencils made for marking that are very nice for this, that won't dissolve or fade away. Ground beef, 1 pound, and the date. All right. It may be that you will want to freeze the hamburger or ground beef for patties. So you'll want to freeze them in a patty shape. The handiest way to do this is what we call a tray pack, where we will freeze them loose, and then we can just take out what we want. Now, if I'm freezing or making a large quantity of meatballs or patties, I like to find something like this little measuring cup or an ice cream scoop that will give me a standard amount. This is about the right size I want my patties to be. You can use another container that will give you the size you'd like yours to be. And I will just put them out on the waxed paper. This is going to be a temporary kind of thing with the waxed paper. I'm not going to use it for the permanent storage. Right. This is going to come out just about the way I wanted it. I have a few more little pieces I'll add to some of these. Now, I'll take another piece of waxed paper, put over the top, and just simply squash the patties out to the size I want. Then I can shape them up a little bit very quickly. Now, to tray pack, and you can do this to fresh fruits and vegetables, you can do this to peas or strawberries or almost anything you want. You just cover them lightly and put them in the freezer for just an hour or two. Now, you have to be on your toes, because if you leave it very much longer, they will dry out too much. And here's some that I have already put in. I put this in about an hour or two ago, and they have already frozen hard. Now I'm going to package these up for permanent freezing. And this will be very easy to do. All I have to do is just pry them away from my tray, and package them loosely in a plastic bag. Almost like packing cookies at this point, and they won't stick together. This is a nice thing about tray pack. We'll twist the top, get the air out as much as we can. Twist the top, and twist them very tightly. Then we would label those ground beef patties and the date. Now, another thing you might want to freeze is steaks or chops. Excuse me, the wrong wrapper. Get out some freezer wrap. The thing about steaks and chops is that you don't want them to stick together. And you don't want to have to go to all the trouble of wrapping them separately. So what I'm going to do is to put them on the paper. Then I have some little squares of freezer wrap that I have cut. I'll put 2 between each chop. Now, sometimes the bones give you problems. They want to stick out and maybe puncture the meat. These don't seem to be that type of bone, but if they do, you'll want to trim those off. Another thing, bulky bones take up a lot of space in the freezer that we don't really need to use for that purpose, because the first thing you do when you go to eat it is take the bone off anyway. So you see, we're just putting 2 pieces between. You may wonder why 2 pieces. Well, so that they will not stick together. 1 piece means it would stick together. All right. Now we're going to use what we call the drugstore wrap. This, we take it and we fold it and turn it. And we bring the ends over like this. Then we'll tape it and label it. Now, the labeling is important because different foods have their own storage life. And the storage time for ground beef and pork chops, to be at their very best, is 4 to 6 months. And your beef roast, 6 to 12. So that doesn't mean that you can't use them after that time. It simply means that they'll not be at top quality. Now, the beef roast, we would wrap the same way we did the chop with our drugstore wrap. But I won't go through that today because I see that the steam is exhausting from our canner, and we want to talk about our canned meat for just a moment. You'll notice that the steam is beginning to come out. You might even be able to hear it. And with it is coming the air. Now, we'll need to exhaust that for about 7 to 10 minutes. The larger canners will take the full time. And at the end of that time, we can be sure that the canner is full of steam. So now that it's coming along pretty well, I'm going to set my timer for 7 minutes, and then we'll just have to wait and see till this time is up for the next step. The time is up, and the steam has been exhausting freely for 7 minutes, which means that the air has probably all been expelled. So now we'll close off the petcock with this weight and just wait until the temperature climbs so that the pressure inside is reading 10 pounds pressure. Now, on an electric range, we'll have to anticipate this and turn it down just a little bit before it gets to 10 because it will take a little while for the unit to cool off. On a gas range, of course, you can turn it off immediately and don't have to do it ahead of time. On a coal or wood range, you will just have to find a cooler place on the range and move it around. There's really no danger in moving the canner as long as you don't take the lid off, of course, but you can lift it with no risk. It's almost 10 now. It's up about 7. It gets just a little bit higher. I will start turning it down. The meat will can for 65 minutes. I'm going to turn it down now and let it climb to 10 by itself, at which time I'll start to time it. That's all we have time for today. I hope you'll be watching next time when we'll be freezing fruits and vegetables here on Food Preserving.
This recorded program was a production of WSWP TV, Grandview, West Virginia.